In this video, I want to discuss the Where Am I calculator. If you look on the main screen, it has an icon called What Do I Need? If I click this icon, it comes up to this unique screen. If you're looking on the left hand side here, you have help icons which give you information, additional help on each step. Basically, what this particular calculator allows you to do is it allows you to see on average what your daily income requirements need to be to cover your expenses. Obviously, this becomes useless for specific jobs. If you have a quote that has $3,000 worth of materials and you've supplied a quote of $4,000 to do that job, well, those materials are job specific, so you would not need that to be included in on this particular calculation. So you can go down the list and click off those categories of expenses that aren't a general expense or that aren't a daily expense. What we're talking about with this list, guys, is really what are your overhead requirements over a year, over a week, that sort of instance. What do you need on an average daily basis that you need to cover? To give you an example, I know of certain contractors who used to contract to a couple of organisations. Now, their workload was increasing, their requirements to purchase materials for certain jobs was increasing, and the amount of money that was costing them to work kept increasing, yet the income that they were receiving stayed the same. So it's the same old typical scenario where you have the contractor wanting to make all the money and the subcontractors have to suffer with what he's giving them. Now, in this instance, these particular guys used this calculation and they came back and told us that they did not realize that over a period of 12 months they had gone from making XYZ to now they only make half as much, and they couldn't work out why. They were doing the same work, but their household income had decreased dramatically and they couldn't work out where all their money was going. But they realized it was because their overheads had increased. So this is where this becomes very useful. And it becomes useful for any business anyway. Even my business, I know exactly what my average overheads are. So it takes it on a average basis. If you've got, obviously the more information you have in the system, the more expense information you have over a given period of time, the more successful the calculation is going to be. So I'm going to give you a quick example. If I just left this whole screen the way it is, with everything included in on it, even though I know that there's materials and stuff here that are job specific. So just to make this simple, right now I'm just going to show you one quick example. I'm just going to leave everything as it is, what this screen says. I'm just going to perform calculations, just so you can see what happens. It jumps away and it performs a calculation, and it says that I need $7.58 each day to cover my expenses. Well, if any organisation only needed that, you'd be really laughing. You'd be going, that is nothing. I can earn that in the first 15 minutes of work. So if that's all you require to cover your overheads, I would want to shake your hand and I'd want to get involved in your business, because that is a very successful business. However, in majority of cases, that is not going to be the case, because by the time you cover liability insurances, all your insurances, then you start looking at your running costs, electricity and fuel and all that sort of stuff. That's going to go up, and you're probably expecting that a lot of businesses average minimum around $50 a day just in overhead running costs. And you have to consider that that goes up. If you only work a 5-day week business and you had it calculated that it would cost you $50 a day, the first $50 you earn for the day has to cover overheads, then that would decrease naturally if you were working 6 days a week. Because then it might be, well, taking that on an average of a 6-day week, you might only then need $45 per day to cover your overheads. You see the difference? And that is where these steps are involved. It says, step 1 says, how many days a week do you work? You can put in how many days, or you can say, look, I just want the calculation of a weekly total. Regardless of how many days I work, give me a weekly figure. So I'm going to give a weekly figure. It says, what information do I use? Between what periods of information in the system? See how when I first opened this screen, it gave us the very first day of the financial year in the first box. The second box gave us the very last dated expense in the system. Because there's no point in using a dated expense 2 years in advance, because that would put your averages off. It would say over 2 years you had this amount worth of expenses. It would give you a devalued figure. So it instantly supplied us with the last dated expense. Naturally, you can change that if you want to look at a month by month basis. You can select 31st of January. Then you can go back here and do a new report or do a new calculation for February, March, and you can see if each month, if your daily expenses is increasing, or however you want to do it. Okay, obviously if certain items are paid per year, then for the month that particular item falls, your daily average is going to go up. That's why I say you really need to look at what your items are that you're turning off and turning on, because those items that are yearly, you possibly normally on average, what I do, I always go the complete financial year, because it gives me a better example, because I have lots of items that are paid yearly, such as insurances. And so obviously in a lot of instances, a lot of people are going to govern this total. They're going to get this calculation over the whole financial year, or over the whole financial year to date, from the beginning of the financial year to where it is to date, because that's a more realistic figure. So if I change this to weekly, let me see what this tells me. That told me that I required $7.58 a day, because the previous time it calculated over a 3-day work week. So now let me see what that does. It now says I now require $22 per week. See that? It changed it to per week, because it's now a weekly figure, and that's what we asked it for. Not a daily figure, a weekly figure. However, if I change it to 7 days, which is still a week, isn't it? It's going to change that and give me that in a daily calculation. So it tells me daily it's going to cost $3.25 per day. So it's the same thing as the weekly, but it's provided in a daily figure. So if I only worked 1 day a week and the overheads remain the same, it's now going to tell me that I require per day, when I work that 1 day a week, the first $22.73 is going to go in overheads. So I think that sort of explains what this screen is for. Each step here will tell you what each of this is. So naturally, if I go down the line here and I start clicking up and I say, well, I don't want these particular categories included in on the calculation. Now, I don't know if I have anything under these categories in my expenses, guys, but I've turned some off. Let's see what it does now. Is this going to be any different if I just click? So I haven't changed any of this now. I've just clicked some of this off. This is $22.73. It shows the last calculation here. See, the very last calculation we did was this one. The one before that was this. So if you're performing different calculations and you want to see the differences in your periods, it records the last 5 calculations. So this is this calculation. If I click perform calculations again, it's now changed that. Because I've turned some of these off, it's now changed that to requiring $10 a day, whereas before it was $22 a day. Because I would say that if you have a lot of materials for job-specific jobs, you don't want that to be included in on this overhead calculation, do you? Because you tender for that, you get paid for that. That is not an overhead, that's job-specific. So go down your list. This is where it comes down to organization. You need to decide what categories you want to include in your expenses, so that when you come to doing or getting a daily average amount of income that you need to make, you can turn off the categories that are not relevant and always retain the categories that are relevant. Now, because I've turned this off, if I exit this screen and come back in, it's going to remember that next time. See that? So obviously, on a general senses, once you've turned off certain items, if you're just like me, you come in here once a month and you perform a quick calculation to see if you're on track, to see if this is changing dramatically, because it records the last 5. I come in here once a month and it sees my last 5 calculations for the last 5 months. So I can go in here and I can see if the overheads are increasing on average or if they're decreasing. I want to see it decreasing, but if it's increasing, I want to know why. And normally, if I've got a materials column or some other column turned off, I'm not turning it back on. I had that off permanently for a reason. So it will remember that. Naturally, if you're testing, then you're going to have to switch it on and off. Okay, that is what that screen does. It's very valuable. Once you start playing with it, I can guarantee you'll begin to use this more and more.